Moscow is gripped by panic. The Cathedral of Christ the Saviour is ablaze right in the center of the capital. Thick smoke is covering it and the surrounding area. A few hundred meters away, the luxury unfinished Ledome building caught fire. Apartments there cost millions of dollars. But now the elite are saving themselves however they can, while workers are trapped by the fire on the upper floors. Well, that's how it is, yeah. Meanwhile, region after region, Russian infrastructure is collapsing.
Damn, that's really good. Wow.
Orel is once again left without power. A strike on the still unrepaired CHP plant. In the Kursk region, the crucial Tsinkum plant, which serves the military sector, is on fire. And the biggest news, a total blackout in Donetsk.
In short, please charge your phones now, as it really looks like they've decided to cut our power everywhere. Stay alert.
The Chaikino substation has been blown up, and Makiivka, Yasynuvata, and Horlivka are also plunged into darkness. We attacked the Vyshkaima CHP. We're getting closer to Moscow so that it will be left without electricity, heat, and water. Russia is entering the night, but in flames and chaos. We'll discuss all this with the well-known military analyst, Roman Svidan.
Greetings, I wish everyone good health.
Tamara Gorky, you wanted the Rubliovka bathhouses to catch fire. Well, the so-called Rubliovka bathhouses did catch fire this weekend. There was a fire in the Moscow region at some bathhouses, which led to a massive evacuation. That was the first celebration, and the second was the Cathedral of Christ the Saviour shrouded in smoke. So something is burning next to it. As I understand, the fire spread to an elite new residential complex. There are workers trapped inside. It's a large-scale fire. As far as I understand, they tried to put it out. Maybe they didn't. The information is still being updated. But do you think this is the work of concerned citizens? Because first it was the bathhouses, and now it's the Cathedral of Christ the Saviour and a luxury elite new building in the center of Moscow.
Well, if it's a new building, then it's probably the Tajiks, the so-called concerned citizens, because they're the ones who mostly build all of that there. And knowing how Russians treat them, of course, they set the place on fire. And there are plenty of people willing to do that. That's if it's next to the church. Well, and the bathhouse is sacred. Most likely, some escort girls weren't paid, and realizing they couldn't become our concerned citizens, only now in the area of the Russian capital, they acted just as the others did, with the same kind of arson. In other words, they set it on fire too. Well, that's clear. It's irony on one hand, but on the other hand, the more that burns in Moscow, the better. For us, that's definitely better, because we need to shut down this Russian capital, shut it down completely from the national administration. Everyone understands this perfectly well, even in Russia itself. This is a metropolis that in its time, over the course of hundreds of years, it amassed for itself and put many territories under practically slave-like conditions. And now there is an opportunity, a great opportunity, to put an end to this metropolis and finally regain the independence that was there originally. The same goes for Bashkortostan, Tatarstan, and so on. In all countries, including, by the way, even Tajikistan. Why do I say that the attitude toward Muscovites is so negative? And there are plenty of people who feel strongly about this all across Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and so on.
Yes, we sincerely wish for the Rubliovka bathhouses, the Cathedral of Christ the Saviour, and all other sites in Moscow to burn. Roman Lvovich, could these be hypothetical acts of sabotage? Or is it just, pardon me, the usual carelessness, as often happens in Russia?
If the stars are being lit, it means someone needs it, right? If something is burning in Moscow, then someone definitely needs it too. Guess 3 times who that might be. People who are trying, resistance forces who are trying to break free from Moscow's control. At least from our point of view, this is a positive development, and it definitely needs to be supported.
Friends, let us know in the comments what you think about the footage when there was a big fire and smoke near the Cathedral of Christ the Saviour at that luxury construction site. Basically, I wish that Muscovites weren't eating lobsters with hazel grouse and expensive oysters, but were constantly in the fire, in the fire, in the fire. Roman Igorovich, another blackout in Orel. So, the not yet finished off Orel CHP plant once again met some good Ukrainian drones today. What do you think of our strikes there? Well,
our missiles can reach Orel, so in principle, Neptunes could have gotten there as well. That is, right now we have 3 Neptune positions. The standard Neptune has a range of 280 to 300 kilometers. There's also an extended version, so to speak, meaning with a longer range. We saw it with comfortable fuel tanks around the center of mass, that is the aerodynamic focus of the missile. That can reach up to 400 kilometers, so they can easily reach Orel. Well, there's already a long-range missile, the so-called Neptune, which was used against Novorossiysk, and that's over 700 kilometers. That was a pretty good job. So I think that besides drones, Neptunes are also being used. We have a good design bureau, the so-called state enterprise Luch Design Bureau, which produces the Neptunes. Now they've increased production, put everything into mass production, so we can already talk about serial production, and the missile is performing quite well. That's the kind of missile we should have been betting on back when we had the chance. That was before Russia's large-scale offensive operation began, instead of cutting missile programs. So a good missile has proven itself well. Orel itself, especially the Orel thermal power plant, is one of the so-called maneuverable balancing power capacities in one of the southern technological corridors of Moscow. This is actually a continuation of the operation to supply Moscow with so-called anti-electricity. That is the destruction of these technological corridors around the perimeter of Moscow. Perhaps since we can't actually enter Moscow itself, our cruise missiles and drones can't break through Moscow's air defense systems. And instead of ballistic missiles, we've just been watching videos and listening to announcements for several years now, at the very least. That's why you can only cut off electricity to Moscow by destroying infrastructure in a wide circle along the perimeter, somewhere between 100 and 300 to 400 kilometers out. These technological corridors, which include not only thermal power plants like in Orel, but also substations of 500 to 700 kilowatts and so on around the circle. In other words, several such strikes have already taken place. And right now, there is an attempt to cut off Moscow by destroying these technological corridors.
Roman Igorovich, there was also a successful attack in the Kursk region. The Tsinkum plant in the Kursk region was attacked and a large-scale fire broke out at the facility. The plant supplied materials for Russia's military sector. As I understand it, this is the first time we've attacked it. The floor is yours.
It's possible to reach Kursk. It's only about 80 kilometers away, I believe. The same missiles could have been used there, including, of course, drones. Our missile forces have been eyeing this plant for a long time, and they are capable of carrying out such a mission, most likely with the support of unmanned systems and special operations forces. Our special services finally reached it and broke through because the Russians were covering it with air defense systems. There's rather serious air defense there. It's like a frontline air defense system with a range of about 180 kilometers. It's frontline air defense, but it can be penetrated. So we've accomplished this mission. There's a military factory there specifically, meaning it was working for the Russian military, and it's still burning, so the operation was quite successful. Well, that's due to its proximity, not far from our border.
Almost the entire occupied part of Donetsk region was left without power after a massive drone attack. Spectacular footage. We'll definitely show it, definitely. So basically, Donetsk is completely without power. It's a total blackout. They're all reporting it, complaining. Local social media pages reported that after this, the entire occupied territory of the region lost power, with disruptions to mobile internet and communications. There's no electricity now in Donetsk, Makiivka, Horlivka, or Yenakiieve. They wrote in the Synth Analytics that the Chaikino electrical substation in Makiivka was hit. Roman Igorovich, the floor is yours.
Donetsk, Russia, is currently being utilized as a significant military hub that supplies the rear of the so-called Russian group, which is currently trying to capture Pokros. For us, from the perspective of disrupting logistics and destroying this military hub, it was important specifically from a military standpoint to also destroy the power generation and energy supply. One of the options was to reach this Chaikino substation. It is 330 kilovolts, powered by 2 thermal power plants, the Starobeshevskaya TPP and the Zuyevskaya GRES, also known as Zugres 2. So a strike on this substation, which cut off the reception of electricity, immediately shut down the Starobeshevskaya thermal power plant and reduced generation at the Zuyevskaya plant. Naturally, with GRES 2, the transfer of electricity to both Horlivka and Yenakiieve also stopped. So this is the general direction. Specifically from the actions taken against this particular substation. It's clear that it supplied power to Makiivka, Yasynuvata, and also Donetsk. That's why Yenakiieve, Horlivka, Yasynuvata, Donetsk, and Makiivka were left without electricity for a while, until Horlivka and Yenakiieve were reconnected. Now they're trying to reconnect Donetsk and Makiivka. I think we'll need to keep working in this direction going forward. Why? Because over the past more than 10 years, the Russians have pushed Ukrainians out of Donetsk. They've practically forced them out. Those who weren't forced out are scattered in basements and detention centers. The Ukrainians have practically left Donetsk, and the Russians have stuffed Donetsk with all sorts of riffraff from beyond the Urals. So now Donetsk is basically a city that the Russians use for these kinds of settlers, so-called temporary stayers, just like Mariupol. For us, it's also important to use various mechanisms, including this one, to push these Russians out of my Donbass. One of the mechanisms is simply to cut them off from electricity. As for water, they've cut themselves off. After all, they're Russians. They were sawing off the branch they were sitting on, and in the end, they ruined the water pipeline that supplied water to Donetsk. So now only electricity remains, and honestly, it will smell musty there for a long time, but I think a couple of our good storms will wash it out. In other words, it will take a long time to clean up all this Russian riffraff. Well, this is one of the ways to drive the Russian rabble out of Donetsk, Makiivka, and Mariupol, with methods like these.
Dear audience, please like this video and share your impressions in the comments about how Moscow is burning, the luxury elite buildings, the churches, and of course, how Russia is being disconnected from the thermal power plants. Blackout, no communication, no YouTube, no internet. In short, freeze, wolf's tail. Roman Nikolaevich, we are attacking again. This time, another electrical substation, Vishkema, located in the district center of Ulyanovsk region, Russia. It is reported to be 900 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Do you see any strategy or tactics in our strikes on thermal power plants in Russia at this point?
This is already going in a wide circle. And the same goes for the tests in Kursk and Orel. These strikes on substations, these are 500 to 750 kilowatt substations that supply those technological corridors, 8 of them, which I mentioned before, that power Moscow. So this is a continuation of work around the perimeter of Moscow, since we can't get into Moscow itself. We don't have ballistic capabilities. But these green little monsters are telling fairy tales about ballistic missiles, and most likely there aren't any and won't be any. Why? Because some of those little monsters actually live in Moscow. In the same. So basically, they won't strike their own because most likely our hands are simply tied on this matter. Our counterintelligence still needs to work on this in action. That's the least we can do. Right now, this is pure sabotage because a missile-producing country can't even launch a short-range missile just 500 kilometers to Moscow. We should have done it 300 times already. And since there's no ballistic missile aimed at Moscow, it means we'll have to cut it off along the perimeter. One of the options is to take out the thermal power plants with maneuvering capacity, the so-called balancing capacity, and of course the substations that transfer 500 kilowatts and above to Moscow and the Moscow region. We also shouldn't forget about the gas transfer lines, the gas pipelines, because there are several dozen gas generators in Moscow. So even if you take out all the substations and knock out all the power lines around Moscow, they will still be able to generate enough electricity using gas to at least supply the main consumers in emergency mode. That's why it's important to also take out those gas pipelines. Well, the optimal solution, of course, would be to take down the Yamal Cross, but you have to get there first. It's 3,000 kilometers away.
Roman Grigorievich, let's move on to the situation at the front, because it has been reported that, unfortunately, in the Zaporizhzhia region, the enemy managed to gain a foothold in 3 settlements and our armed forces have withdrawn. How do you assess the current situation?
Most likely there was a backroom deal in 2022, maybe earlier somewhere in Oman, about giving up Donbass, Crimea, and the land corridor. I don't see it any other way here. It's a chain of cause and effect relationships. Right now, Donbass is being surrendered, as well as the land corridor on the left bank of the Zaporizhzhia region. We have a good position there. And in Pokrovsk, we had good positions. And in the Hulyapol area, the position was excellent. But due to certain actions, or rather, I would say, inactions of our green authorities who did not bring things up to par, how long have we been at this? For half a year, we've been saying that we need to line up the security forces, take the armor off the law enforcement officers. take it from the civil servants and form a line, reinforce those corps that were properly created at the time. But now the corps have been created, only they're left without professionals. They tried to gather up collective farmers, so to speak. They created a collective farm, so let's get collective farmers. They tried to gather up collective farmers, but collective farmers can't fight, at least not right away. They're not trained for it. That's what they call busified people. And even then, they didn't recruit as many as needed. Of course, who would go if they don't know how to do this job? And those who do know how to do it are hiding behind armor. Hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officers hid behind armor, and only about 10% were sent out half-heartedly, as they say. The other 90% are caught in the rear of a country at war. They need to be put on the front lines. And since this wasn't done, it means this direction was technically surrendered. Crimea, Donbass, and the land corridor. It's obvious even to the naked eye when something can be done but isn't. So, as we discussed before, if a person wants to but can't, that's impotence. But if someone can but doesn't want to, that's, let's put it mildly, a female dog. Here we have the same kind of green female dogs who didn't put the law enforcement officers in formation. Right now, we're losing ground on the Zaporizhia front. There's no catastrophe there yet, of course, but the Russians have already approached Huliaipol from the north and east. And Huliaipol is one of the strongholds in that direction. If we withdraw from Huliaipol, the Russians will continue advancing towards Zaporizhia, trying to encircle the Yenakiieve garrison as well. If we lose Huliaipol, we'll lose the Yenakiieve garrison too. If they reach Zaporizhia and start hitting it with army artillery, we'll lose Zaporizhia. We'll lose it completely. It's ours on the left bank. Kherson is still somewhat protected by the river. And most of Zaporizhia is on the left bank, especially our technological giants, the Zaporizhia ferroalloy plants, the metallurgical complexes, and so on.
Roman Nikolaevich, here's the latest information. Deep State reports that the occupiers have advanced in the Huliaipol direction near Ravnopilia and Novouspensky. The occupiers have also made gains near Yampol and Novomarkovske in Donetsk region, that is in Donetsk Oblast.
Well, Yampol is near Lyman, so we definitely have a big problem there. The Russians are trying to move from Yampol, pushing further toward Lyman in order to approach Sloviansk from the north. So this direction is also problematic. Well, as for Zaporizhia, at the moment we have two such critical areas, Pokrovska and Zaporizhka. Basically, it's a single area. As we discussed, one of the Russians' objectives will be to move along this line, Huliaipol-Pokrovsk. That's exactly the route they're advancing along. So this line should have been reinforced in due time, but reinforced with what? As I said, put law enforcement on the front lines, not just have them chasing people. But what ends up happening is our law enforcement are busy catching farmers, supposedly doing their main job. Instead, they send the farmers to the army, even though they themselves should be the ones on the front lines.
Roman Lvovich, and now, of course, an important topic, the meeting between the leaders of France and Ukraine. Ukraine has reached an agreement with France to purchase 100 Rafale fighter jets. I'm interested in your opinion. When will they arrive? When will we see them in the Ukrainian sky defending our airspace? The floor is yours.
That's exactly the question here. Right now, we have major problems in the east. Donbass is being surrendered. Zaporizhia is being given up through inaction. In order to cover up this surrender, instead, they're rushing around the world trying to create a positive image for their leader's face. How else can I put it? There are problems now. There will be problems tomorrow. There will be problems the day after tomorrow. The Rafales, when? In 10 years? We were promised Gripens, and when did those arrive? In 15 years? 10 or 15 years from now? We don't need that. That's the most interesting part. We need them now, and the issue needs to be resolved here and now. So right now, we shouldn't be worrying about Rafales or Gripens, but about the means of destruction that are needed immediately. We need missiles. We have Mirages, but we need missiles. Rafales won't be delivered tomorrow anyway. Even Gripens, if we're talking about Gripens, then in 10 to 15 years, maybe 150 Gripens. We need at least a flight of 4 Gripens right now, so that we can use Meteor missiles with them. Because the platform itself isn't that important. In other words, the aircraft itself isn't so crucial. Because what's the point of having several dozen F-16S if we don't have JASSMs for them? If we don't have AIM-120D missiles for them, which could operate at ranges over 150 kilometers? What's the use of these planes then? It's like using fly swatters, as they say, against Russian Gerans in the rear. Nothing more than that. So the approach should be a bit different. It's the means of destruction that hits the Russians, not the delivery platform. That's the main problem here. And quoting now, pay attention, that somewhere someone went to France to hang out, while at the same time Zaporizhia and Donetsk are giving up Donetsk region. Well, that's just to distract attention and nothing more. Let me explain it again in simple terms. Right now. And right now, all these agreements need to be in place. With Macron as well, we need to make requests to him. A sufficient number, let's say, of those same HIMARS, which have proven themselves very well. An additional number right now that could be used, for example, in Huliaipol, the HIMARS can reach there. So that's what the Mirages are for, to launch them. And our Sukhoi jets are working very effectively in some areas. That's the most important thing at the moment. Everything else for now, let's put it this way, there's a good expressive Ukrainian word for it. Pulling the wool over your eyes. In Russian, it's called eyewash. And right now, this whole green gang is just trying to pull the wool over the eyes of Ukrainian society, while blatantly, excuse my language, screwing up the Eastern Front. For now, I don't see any positive aspects here, to be honest.
Roman Grigorievich, what are the specific outcomes of this meeting? Let me briefly go over them now so you can comment. The scenario of supplying Ukraine with new aircraft from the manufacturer, but this will take time. We're talking about at least 3 years, Roman Grigorievich, from signing the agreement to the delivery of the fighter jets. The price of the new Rafale 4S as of 2024 has been set, according to the contract between France and Serbia, at $225 million per fighter jet. The parties to the signed agreements must pay either through a reparations loan, funds from the EU Defense Fund, or with frozen assets of the Russian Federation. Roman Grigorievich, but 3 years. 3 years.
In 3 years, Russia won't even exist anymore. There will be no one left to fight against. That's why I'm saying this is just eyewash. Let them look for glasses, or better yet, rub them into each other. Or is it glasses? What's the right way to say it? Where does the stress go? They know better over there. What's the point of these Rafales in 3 years? And in 15 years, Gripens? What's the point of them? Our main task right now is to stop the front that's collapsing and to strike a blow to the Russian economy, so that in 3 years we won't even need Rafales. At over 200 million each, let them fly them themselves. A plane should cost about 50 to 60 million, not over 200. It's a good machine, no question about it. But we definitely won't have enough of them. And if we're going to commit to something, then it's better to commit to the Swedes, specifically to the Gripens. That's if we're talking about the future. Again, what kind of future, what level of future are we talking about? We need it tomorrow. Right now, we have about 50 F-16S. Don't you wonder why you never see or hear them anywhere? They have nothing to shoot with, just so you understand the situation. There's nothing to launch, nothing to drop. So they just fly around in the rear, shooting down Russian Gerans. That's it. All right, at least these are relatively affordable, several tens of millions of dollars. But if they end up costing hundreds of millions, why would we even need them? Then believe me, in 10 years, piloted aircraft won't be needed at all. Because in the near future, in just 3 to 4 years, drones will take to the skies. In other words, planes, but without pilots, controlled entirely by artificial intelligence. Tasks will simply be assigned, and they will carry them out on their own. Right now, if we're going to sign any long-term contracts with anyone, the best option is with the Turks for the same Kizil Elma, for the Miles project. But these guys are running around like fools with their mortars, talking about planes in 15 years. We need planes now. We have planes right now. They just don't have Jaza missiles on them. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's where the main problem is. And right now, we need to focus on missiles. So which European missiles could be used? The same Taurus, for example. The same Mika missile, the same Aster-30 missile for the SMT. So that's what we need to focus on. What can be used right now, like the French Hammer, for example. If we take the Taurus, for example, and the Orion missile, then that missile can be used as well. That's the Gripen. That's the optimal option. That's what we need right now. Gripens should be delivered tomorrow or the day after, at least within the next month, so that these missiles can be used to drive away Russian aviation and smash the Russian economy. That's what we need to focus on. Not on Kazimilion in 3, 5, 10, or 15 years, something that will definitely not be needed. The only good thing is that no one is signing the agreement. That's just empty talk. And again, about Kazimilion. Now they're trying to sign the so-called agreement. It's some kind of supposed agreement, meaning it's not a real contract. It's what we call a memorandum of understanding, which doesn't obligate anyone to anything. They went and bought Rafales for 220 million. And again, I keep saying, let them fly them themselves.
On Maligok, there's the Pink Flamingo missile, for which the Czechs raised about $500,000 in just 2 days. They showed a photo of it to the Associated Press. The publication writes that representatives of the Weapons of Ukraine initiative, Jan Polak and Martin Anderchik, hope that the missile will fly to Moscow or St. Petersburg. We feel that they are fighting for us, they said. We are extremely grateful, but this is also a reason to talk about our own Flamingo missiles. Where are they? How many do we have? And when will serial production finally begin?
The Pink Flamingo is the child of kickbacks. I understand it's probably just a song now about the flamingo. Why didn't they fly off to warmer places, to Israel? Where else? Where are ours? Another note about Israel, but where else could they be? If they already announced hundreds of missiles, then by now they would have already burned half of Russia if they really existed. So it's just another PR stunt, a smokescreen, nothing more. Especially since the missile is simple. It was once thousands, tens of thousands of them were produced by the Germans almost 100 years ago. This is the V1. Back then, it cost between 3,000 and 10,000 Reichsmarks. That's roughly between $10,000 and $40,000. Well, let's say it would cost 100,000 now, not $500,000 like they're trying to sell it to us for. So, of course, a big thank you to our friends, the Czechs, who understand and are trying to take part in this process. But now all of this already causes an aversion after the Flemings basically smeared this whole topic with Israeli manure. We understand this perfectly well. And now all these flamingos, little flamingos and fire pants, all these fiery pants are perceived completely negatively. There is definitely a problem. So yes, some of them will be sent somewhere because some rockets are being produced, 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, but not more than that, because for now it's still, these are pre-serial tests and experimental models, which might simply not make it because they're still far from mass production. And if this whole flamingo saga continues, then they won't go anywhere at all. So we understand perfectly well how this could end. It has already ended badly. Why? Because our partners have started to look askance at our executive branch, which should have been changed a long time ago. The entire cabinet of ministers needs to be dismissed. Right now, we need a government that has the people's trust, one that is coordinated with our partners. First of all, this government of public trust means that the people of Ukraine themselves should nominate about a dozen ministers whom they trust, coordinate them with our partners, and these ministers should also inspire trust among our partners, the ones providing the funding. And not into the hands of Flaminish, but into the hands of those representatives of the people of Ukraine who can be trusted to replace the executive branch. Until we do this, until we replace the entire cabinet of ministers, this whole Shmihal team should be sent to the front so they can experience firsthand what they've been buying lately, and also be sent to Pokrovsk. The entire Shmihal team, the whole cabinet of ministers, the entire executive branch should be called up through the territorial recruitment center and sent to Pokrovsk. And let them fight with what they themselves have purchased, while we bring into the cabinet of ministers people who have the full trust of both the Ukrainian people and our partners. This can be done in 2 to 4 hours. The cabinet of ministers can be changed without political struggle within 24 hours. Why? Because we have a parliamentary presidential republic. We need to finally remember our constitution, the parliamentary presidential republic. Power belongs to the people, meaning the people hold the power. And the legislative power, that is the representatives of the people, is the Verkhovna Rada. That's why pressure needs to be put on the Verkhovna Rada so that it expresses no confidence in the government and dismisses it completely. Naturally, those officials shouldn't just end up in the territorial recruitment centers, TRCs, right away, straight from the cabinet to the TRCs. The TRC staff should be waiting for them at the exit. After all, they pushed through the same law themselves, the very mobilization law they promoted, so let them go to Pokrovsk to help our guys hold Pokrovsk. For example, at Huliaipol, let them choose there. People should have a choice, so let them choose Pokrovsk or Huliaipol. And naturally, within those 24 hours, bring in new people. That possibility exists. It was done in the summer, but they just didn't do it right. They just shuffled things around inside that mess. The ministers from the cabinet switched out the beds and the girls there, but they forgot to change the sheets and they stink. There's still a problem with the sheets. Dear
audience, Ukraine will receive 8 SMT air defense systems, a total of 48 launchers. This is a historic deal. France, of course, is currently working on their modernization, as Emmanuel Macron stated. I think we will definitely discuss this next time. The well-known military analyst Roman Svetlan. Roman Igorovich, thank you as always. See you this Wednesday. Friends, please like this video and write a few warm words in the comments to support the armed forces. Goodbye.